educators from Brazil who've joined us. So welcome to our international visitors. So we really look forward to a day of learning with and from all of you. So two acknowledgments before I introduce our keynote speakers. The first is if you open up your program for the day, you'll see that breakout sessions are facilitated by Provost Teaching Academy faculty. Temple Provost Teaching Academy, we have about 70 members who are some of Temple's best and most committed educators. And one of the ways they've demonstrated that commitment is they have spent an entire 5 weeks of their summers reading the literature on how people learn and best practices in higher education. So they are really wonderful facilitators for today and really excellent resources on Temple's campus. If you are a member of the Provost Teaching Academy, put your hand so we could acknowledge you. You're a really important group for us at Temple. And I do also want to acknowledge the Teaching Learning Center staff who have attended to so many details to bring you all here together. We have 100 more people than we've ever had in the past. It's our biggest conference. And I just want to thank my colleagues for all the work they've done to get you here today and plan a delightful program. So let me introduce our speakers. As you know, our program is on the theme of 7 principles for smart teaching. Our speakers are co-authors of this book, as you can see on the screen. This really wonderful book that synthesizes the research about human learning and makes very practical suggestions for ways that you can use those principles to inform your teaching, to promote your students' learning. So we have invited them here today. In the morning, Dr. Marsha Lovett will be speaking, and in the afternoon, we stay for the whole day because we have great sessions, and then Dr. Michele DiPietro will be concluding the program this afternoon. Provost Highline Dye will also be here this afternoon to address all of you because he really supports the work that we do to foster excellent teaching. So, let me now introduce Dr. Marsha Lovett, who is the author of this important book. She's also the director of the Eberly Center for Teaching Excellence at Carnegie Mellon University. At Carnegie Mellon, she is also a teaching professor in the Department of Psychology, where she conducts research on learning, memory, and problem solving. In addition to authoring this book, she has authored over 50 articles on issues of learning and instruction. She's also developed some exciting educational technologies, including StatTutor and Learning Dashboard. Welcome to Marsha Lovett.
And thanks to all my hosts at the Temple PLC. It's been great to visit with them. Before I get started, I think there may be some people still looking for seats. If there's a seat near you that's open, you could raise your hand and maybe we could invite, I guess they're allowed. Maybe we can invite some people to filter in. Thank you. Okay. Great. So, I wanted to start by learning a little bit about you all. You've heard a little bit about me. First of all, how many of you are teaching this semester? And yet, you're here today. That's great. How many have started already? The semester started? Okay, and how many are yet to start? Maybe next week people start. Yeah. Okay, great. So regardless of where you are in your semester, I think my first question will tap into some recent experiences. And I want to focus my first question for you all on all the decisions we make as teachers, from the planning to the implementing to the moment-to-moment work with students. So just for a moment, and this is to get everyone's thinking activated on these issues. To the person next to you, I was thinking if we could just quickly discuss, you could come up with 3 to 5 things that you had to decide on in preparing your course this semester. Just really quickly. Take 2 minutes to do that.
Yeah, I would say probably trying to like bottom up a little bit.
How many people came up with 3 to 5 things pretty easily? Yeah, did you feel like you could just go on and on? I got that sense. Yeah. Now, maybe we shouldn't do this again off and on. Now, maybe in your head instead of talking it through. Or if you're willing to come back and forth with me, we can do that too. What I want you to think about is those were the things that you were planning. Maybe those were things that you explicitly thought about, right? But I think it's also important to acknowledge when you're in the middle of teaching, there are a lot of decisions we make without even thinking of it. They're on the fly. If you just, for example, a student asks a question in the middle of class. How do you respond? Do you respond with an answer? Do you respond with a question back? Do you say, let's take that offline? I mean, all these kinds of things that we have to do. I bet our people who are remotely, they probably have done a bunch of these decisions as well. And the thing that I think is really striking is if you add these two contexts and all the opportunities and situations that we face as teachers together, there are so many decisions we make. It makes this guy's job look easy, right? Now, at the same time, all those decisions, there's a little bit of pressure there, right? Because these decisions have consequences. They have consequences for the students' engagement, the time they're going to spend working on our class, learning in the class, and potentially noted impact on their learning. So that's a little bit something to think about. But then what I want to focus on today is the side of these decisions that really emphasizes the power we have to make a difference in making those decisions in such a way that can really promote students' learning. And that's the focus that former colleague and co-author Michele and I are going to talk about today. Really, what does all that we do as teachers have to do with learning? So you notice I switched from all the teaching decisions to a very learner-oriented perspective. We wrote this book because there's so much research and results in the literature on student learning. And yet, as faculty working in our own disciplines, it's hard to really tap into that. There's also a lot of expertise that you all have when you're working in the classroom and making those decisions and seeing how it unfolds and maybe tweaking and really bringing such expertise and mastery to the class. We thought what we needed was a way to combine the practice of teaching and the literature and research on how students learn. So we did create this based on the literature and our work with faculty to really focus it in and parse the literature into areas where we knew faculty had often been interested. What's also nice in my mind about the 7 principles that we'll be talking about is that they're broadly applicable. So when we looked to the research, we made sure that the findings and so forth that we were tapping into were things that had been replicated in multiple contexts, maybe across disciplines, across student levels, and teaching contexts. But what I like most about the principles is I think of them as generative. They're not a specific to-do. It's rather a set of models for thinking about how students learn that in my mind can really help inform those decisions. Because each one of your teaching contexts is unique, right? And if I said, here's the best practice, well, each one of you would have to make that your own. And so thinking about the principles as sort of models for making decisions that work best for your discipline, your students, your teaching context is really where I can be helping in leading to effective practice. So what I'd hope by the end of this session is that you could have learned about a few of the principles and be able to describe 2 to 3 of them, say, to a colleague, and for each of those, generate some kind of strategy that you think you could apply in your teaching. Maybe some days, maybe Monday. And then also have a chance to network with colleagues in this. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the principles. We titled this sort of knowledge and application because these principles deal with the development of conceptual understanding, skill, mastery, and so forth. And Michele is going to talk about motivation, metacognition, and also student development and question assignment, and how these things all fit together. So my one caveat I have to say right away is this division into different areas of teaching and learning, it's somewhat artificial, right? We know that when the student comes to us and there's a learning issue, it's not just a prior knowledge issue in isolation. But for sake of discussion, we'll kind of take them one at a time. And if situations arise in our discussion or the cases that I raised that bridge some of those areas, we'll be sure to note that. So first, prior knowledge. One of my favorites because we all know the students come in, they're not blank slates. But there's actually some really interesting results in the research that I think can really give us some new ideas about how prior knowledge impacts learning. So the way we pass this one is prior knowledge could be students' content knowledge in your domain. So how much do students already know about what you're going to teach them? It could also be how much they know about the prerequisite knowledge. And if you're anything like me, there's usually a lot of diversity in students' prior knowledge. So it's something you really need to think about. It may not just be the content knowledge. It may also be sort of domain general skills like communication, presentation, critical thinking. And so those aspects of prior knowledge also can have a really big effect. When those aspects of prior knowledge are activated, that is, they're right in front of the student's mind, it's sufficient for the task that you have at hand, appropriate and accurate, learning is really promoted. But when those things or some combination of things are not in place, learning can be hindered. The thing that I think we often think of is when students come to us with inaccurate prior knowledge. Maybe they have a misconception. And that is really a difficult thing to deal with. But I want to start with the top one. When students come with knowledge that's actually relevant and accurate, it's not immediately true that they will be able to use that to help promote their learning. So I want to start with the situation when students have inactive prior knowledge. And I'm going to tell you a little story. It's a story that actually was part of a cognitive psychology experiment. That's my field, cognitive psychology. And so I'll read this aloud. The scenario is that a general wishes to capture a fortress. Roads radiate outward from the fortress, but all of them have been mined, so that if a large force travels on them, it will detonate the mine. A full-scale direct attack is therefore impossible. So students in this experiment were given that context of the problem, and then they were told the solution. The solution is, well, you can divide the army into small groups, send each group on a different road to the fortress, and have the groups converge simultaneously in the fortress. So does that make sense? Did to the students too. Then they were given a little puzzle activity to work on, and then they were given this problem to actually solve themselves. Just moments later, a patient has a malignant inoperable tumor. If the tumor is not destroyed, the patient will die. Fortunately, there's a kind of ray that can be used to destroy the tumor. If the ray reaches the tumor at sufficiently high intensity, the tumor will be destroyed. However, if the ray is used at that high intensity, it will damage the surrounding tissue. So what type of procedure might be used to destroy the tumor with the rays and yet at the same time avoid destroying healthy tissue? I see a few nodding heads. Does anyone see a solution to this problem? Someone just said we just had it. Yeah. So I think a lot of you, and I would guess it looks like the majority of you, see that a solution to this problem is split the ray into lower intensity and have the rays converge on the tumor, protecting surrounding tissue but destroying the tumor, right? Now, it seems really obvious, I think. Does anyone want to venture a guess as to the percent of students in this study who came up with that solution when they were given these problems almost back to back? Anyone want to venture a guess? What percent? Okay, you guys are actually 30% is the number. Now, but that's not even quite the right way to think about it, because if students are just given this problem alone, 10% of them get it. So really, it's sort of even lower than 30. If students were given the hint, think back to that fortress problem. Jumps up. The majority, almost like 80%, depending on the other context of the experiment. Students can see they have knowledge that's relevant. Now, I'm betting that there's cases in your teaching where students have knowledge that's relevant, but for whatever reason, they don't bring it to bear. So this is actually a really powerful aspect of the prior knowledge principle. If students have it, if we just help them activate it, then there really can be some benefit for learning. So, one of the strategies or sort of general heuristics that come out of this principle is how important it is to deliberately activate prior knowledge. And I want to tell you about a study. So it's not just in the cognitive psychologist lab where this is relevant, but a study in a statistics course. This was a college statistics course focusing, this day of class was focusing on the concept of variability, which abstract and rather difficult. And so in one situation, the students were asked to generate examples from their own lives where variability came to play, to represent their examples graphically, and then the teacher would draw on those examples during class, tying it to the theoretical concept that was being explained. In this case, compared to students who were taught in the traditional version of this class, without that activation of students' relevant prior knowledge, they learned more so that they outperformed those traditional students 2-to-1 on the concept of variability. So that really shows you how power that can actually unfold in real classes. So now what I want you to do is, I'll give you more than 2 minutes this time. Think about a situation in your teaching where there's a topic that your students have some prior knowledge of, but they don't necessarily tap into it. How could you get them to activate that? What activity, questions, prompts, what do you think, or what might you do in class differently to really get that activated before you launch into building on it in your teaching? So just take a few minutes, talk to your partner, and then I'm going to ask a few folks from the audience to share with us. Maybe these are things you've already done, or an idea you could think of now. So take a chance at that.
I'm on. Yeah, it's just.
There's a lot of conversation, which is good. Did folks find that they could generate a strategy? Is there someone, a couple folks who want to share an idea? Because I think this is the real benefit of us coming together at meetings like this. You don't need to hear it from me. You need to hear it from your colleagues as well. So is there someone from the audience? Please. Perfect. Love it. Yes. So, anyone else? Yes, please. Yes, right. So making the connection and inviting students to make that connection is probably even more powerful than you doing it, right? Make the connection to what they already know that's relevant. And here's our first case of principles intermixing. That can also be motivating, right? Because they can see what I'm learning now relates to something I already know or relates to something I already care about. So those are really great examples. Does anyone on the remote have something? Okay. So in the future, if they have some generated ideas, they can send them through the chat to Brian, and we'll share them with the group. Yeah, thanks. Yes, I'm going to tackle that next. In fact, great segue. Thank you. So, but what if, as you said, what if the knowledge is insufficient, inappropriate, or inaccurate? Right? There's the rub. Right? That's the thing that often is an issue. And here's my little quote on that. So, where does it come up? Just a few examples. Oh, by the way, if you are trying to take notes, I did select a few of my slides, and there's a handout in your manila folder. So students may misapply disciplinary conventions. They may come to college with a writing style that is what they learned in high school, or they may come to one discipline with writing conventions and stylistic approaches from another discipline. Think about science lab reports, analytical research papers, creative writing, literary analysis. They're all a little bit different, right? There's knowledge, and the students don't realize this is the other way of doing it. So that's one where it can happen. This is just sort of a mismatch. They can confuse technical with non-technical meanings. My favorite example of that is acceleration is a word that has meaning in daily life, but when you're in physics, it has a very precise technical meaning, and that can really trip students up. Or they may have deeply held misconceptions. Those are the trickiest and gnarliest to deal with, but what I think is most valuable, and the research really relates to this as well, when students have these issues with their prior knowledge, the thing that's really helpful to do, first of all, before you figure out how to address it, is find a good way to gauge it. How can you assess students' prior knowledge? It's actually kind of tricky, so I want to give you a little example of research on this. Students often estimate their knowledge and their abilities. And so if you just ask students, how well do you know X? it's likely to be an overestimate. So the less students know, the more they overestimate. So it's not the best way to just ask them flat. You've probably seen that happen. How many of you studied these statistics? T-tests. Oh, they all raise their hands because the word sounds familiar, right? That's not sufficient for the word sounding familiar for them to actually build on that knowledge. And my scariest example of this, in one research study, nurses students were asked in phlebotomy, taking blood, how good do you think your procedure is at drawing blood? And they were very confident, yeah, we're good at it, and then they were actually tested. And so you kind of don't want to rely on just what the students say. Then what can you do, right? The best thing, sort of the gold standard is performance assessment. Actually ask them to do something, and it needs to be a lot. So I work with faculty at Carnegie Mellon, and sometimes I'll just say, just pick half a dozen questions that you could ask students early on. It doesn't even count for a grade. They do it to help you understand what they know. And then they can also, the good thing is, they can also see, do they have trouble with those problems? And then you can give them pointers to resources or whatnot, or let them know you're going to build on these things. If it's a prior knowledge test of their prerequisite knowledge, there is a way to do self-assessment that is a little more robust, and I can share that with you all. So a performance assessment might be a multiple choice question to see what the students remember about mitosis. You could also give students a little problem. I also know a person in our drama school who needs to rely on students' written communication and ask them to write a short essay about something, their experience that's relevant to the class. It kind of activates their prior knowledge, but it also gives them an early read on what's their level of writing skill. So that's a few examples of performance assessment. And then a self-assessment, if you get students, here's one on Shakespearean plays, a few of them, and if you get students to rate their knowledge just in terms of do you know it or do you not, but instead, that's going to be a little less accurate. Instead, if you ask them for some more concrete, to sort of simulate what they could do with that knowledge, it tends to be more accurate. So here's one for this example. You could ask students, is this something that you don't really know how to apply this concept? You think you could apply it if you were able to look up some examples or see something in a book, or you could do it on your own, or you think you could teach it to another student. So kind of give them a little more concrete options for rating their prior knowledge. So I think, given time, I'm going to jump along to the next item in the next principle in our discussion, and that is the organization of knowledge. So we've been talking about prior knowledge, and already we were talking about those connections being important. And the idea of connections in the network of what students know is really what this principle is all about. So here's the picture of the model of the organization of knowledge principle. The idea is that how students organize their knowledge is really important. It influences how they learn and apply what they know. It's not just that they know a mixed bag of facts. It's how they connect those facts. And it's a case where experts and novices really differ. It's where you have in your head a very organized mental map of what you're teaching, your discipline, the course, etc. That has rich connections. You see how things are related. You know what's important. You know what is more of a detail. And that network of connections really helps you to perform quickly, because the way you can think about knowledge networks is kind of like a roadmap. If there's a shorter route or a more well-traveled route between two nodes, there's going to be quicker access of the related concepts or ideas. So that really supports your learning and performance, so you don't even think about it. Novices, however, they tend to develop sparse and superficial networks. So we need to help them develop these structures And the thing is, it doesn't happen easily, naturally, without some support. So just to give you a concrete example of this, because I've been talking in the abstract, we can imagine that when a historian thinks about the 1960s, this is, just a quick simulation of the concepts that they would have in mind and the relationships and all the linkages. And what's really should jump out at you is that what's most prevalent here is there are lots of connections. When a student, maybe even after they've had part of a course, there aren't many links, right? And it's different fragments, right? So they might not even see that there's a connection to be made from one set of nodes to another. So we really need to help them. And this is one of the things where I think it doesn't hurt to put it in neon light, that there's a relationship worth noting. Another place this arises, it's actually another example of the organization of knowledge is in problem-solving domains, where if you ask, this is a pretty classic experiment, if you ask students to look at these physics problems, and they don't have to solve them, but you ask them to sort them into categories, the problems that go together, the novices will sort the problems based on the ones that look alike. So there are these disk ones they sort together, and these are the inclined plane problems, and that's the way they think of it. Is this another, and they get their homework, is this another inclined plane problem? Is this another pulley problem? And they even label them as such, right? That's their mental map of the domain and what they're going to learn, and it influences how they learn and how they interpret those new problems coming in. Now, if you ask experts, in this study it was advanced graduate students, to organize the same set of problems into categories, they did it by principle. Like all the problems that tapped into Newton's second law, they were in a category. All the problems that involved conservation of energy. So you can see the novices were sorting it on surface features, and the experts were sorting on deep features. It makes sense, though, because they don't know those deep features yet, and that's why it's all the more important to highlight to students what are those features, how do you find them, and then what are some examples of multiple problems that may look very different but are connected because they tap into the same deep issues. So implications of this principle for learners is, they often don't see the connection. So they may not see the point of the reading. One of my favorites is students who kind of take each week, and I was just finishing teaching a seminar course where we were doing reading throughout the semester. And when I first started teaching this course, the students would sort of take the readings for each class, and then it was as if then they did a memory dump. They thought it wasn't relevant anymore. But I kept asking them to remind each other when they saw connections to the prior reading. And I made it their task, kind of like, who can find a connection to one thing that we've previously read to today's reading? And it became something where they would then start generating them and suggesting them on their own. And I think it really helped them to build a more solid knowledge network. So then the strategies on our own that can help here are to give students an organizing structure. So especially if students are more novices or earlier on in their program of study, it might be helpful for you to just give them an overarching framework for thinking about how all the knowledge is going to fit together in what you're going to teach them. And also to highlight important features and relationships in the course of teaching. I want to talk about two strategies for the first one, or two issues for the first one, and then I want to see if it relates to your teaching, how it might relate to teaching. So in terms of organizing knowledge for a given class session, we've often been told, give an advanced organizer. Tell students, tell them what you're going to say it, then tell them something like that, whatever it is. But I just wanted to, and it is demonstrably effective for learning when you have an organizing framework before teaching and learning interaction. But I wanted you to contrast these and think about the difference between them. It's pretty notable, right? On the right-hand side, there actually is three conceptual issues that just when you list it this way, the students can already start seeing the connections between the different things we're going to talk about in the lecture. Another way I like to think of a lecture, sometimes is to think of it as an arc. What's the arc of the story of the lecture? Narrative is another good way for connections to be made. And I think even though this may be our tendency, it's not as easy for students to build connections when they have this kind of more abstract organizing or advanced organizing. So that's one message. When you think of your course as a whole and the sort of framework that can help students, I call it, what's the big picture of your course? And I think sometimes it's useful for us to actually sit and reflect, what is the big picture of my course? What's really important? What are the small set of ideas that are important, and how do they connect? One of my colleagues in statistics I've worked with a lot actually thought about this because he was teaching students introductory statistics and found that they didn't see the connections, and that was really distressing to him because he saw it as a cycle. And students were coming away thinking there's this module and this module. So what he did is he created this, it's kind of a node and link, but then he made it pretty. But it shows there's this idea of the population that has as its role, it produces data, and you need to think about how to produce data in ways that will be effective. And then there's the data, that's the sample you have, and students are going to learn all of these techniques for exploratory data analysis. But then we use this conceptual framework of probability to make inferences from our data back to the population, because that's what we can't see in its entirety, but we really want to know about from the data. And so he spends time early in the semester explaining this big framework. And then throughout the semester, he comes back to it and says, so now we've been talking about, and now we're going to see how that relates to, and really uses it sort of as an overall thematic organizing structure for the course. And I think it's interesting because what he had to do to make this picture was he had to simplify in his own mind a bit. There's obviously a lot more he could have put from his mental math, but he said these are really the key ideas and how they relate. And if students come away understanding that set of relationships, I will feel really happy. So what I would like you all to do is individual activity. If you found your handout, I tried to make it so there's a space here and there. You can draw on it, or maybe find a little place. What I'd like you to do is just spend a little time. Think about a course. Maybe the course you're teaching now, or a course you'd like to teach, or have taught, and generate a list of maybe half a dozen key ideas, issues, or concepts. The things that are central to that course. And then organize them spatially, put each one in a circle, and then draw the connection. Okay? Link between those nodes and see what shape you come up with. What is really the central idea? And does that match what you think you want and what students will come away with? So, spend a few minutes doing that, and I'll just circulate. If folks have questions or suggestions, feel free to raise a hand as I circulate.
Yeah, and I didn't yeah, probably like 6 minutes. Yeah.
If you've made some headway already and you just have some lines to notice, the last thing is you can label those lines about the nature of the relationship. You might want to do that, and we'll come together as a group in just a second. Okay. Was this hard or easy? It was easy. Was it hard to narrow it down to a small number of habits? Does anyone have a concept map they want to share? As if you're giving us a sense of what your course is about, these concepts and how they relate. Just in a sort of 1 minute, and we'll have a microphone for you so that our remote. Anyone? What? Okay, we're going to get a mic for you. Sure.
I teach kinesiology, and pretty much it expands upon human anatomy and physiology and movement. So the big picture is we want to teach students how they can prevent injury and optimize performance of the athletes or just the overall people that they work with in whatever field in health. So that's the biggest concept, and when I break it down to a little bit more, we want to make sure that they can improve movement and make it effective and efficient at the same time. And in order to do that, they need to be able to assess the dysfunction of different patterns that people have, different patterns. And to further break it down, they need to know what the different motions are, the movement patterns, and then that involves knowing what the muscles and bones and all of those things do in the first place and how they contract.
That's terrific. So actually, I didn't know anything about kinesiology. So if I were going to come to her class, now I know why I need to study muscles and bones, because that relates to the natural, if I got this right, the natural muscle, the natural movement pattern, and then that helps me as a practitioner maybe identify when there's a difficulty, and then that helps me do what I want to do, is help the person in their optimal movement. Okay. Yes, please, another one. Do you have the mic?
So I teach ESL to adults, and one of the classes that we teach is essay writing, how to write essays. And so in one course, we might have them write a cause and effect essay, a comparison contrast essay, and an argumentative essay. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. And usually, Stephanie? Okay. Usually, I let them choose their own topic. But now I have an idea that I might choose a theme, and they write about the same theme in different types of essays. So, for example, if I make the theme of one semester homelessness, right? So their cause and effect essay, they can write about certain causes of homelessness. And then for the comparison contrast essay, they might talk about causes of homelessness versus causes of poverty, right? Some similarities, maybe some differences. And then for their argumentative essay, they can defend whether homelessness is caused more by personal failures or more by like systemic social problems. That's one thing I thought of. If they don't like the topic of homelessness, they're in trouble.
Thank you. Great. So you can see there are a lot of ways to exercise. The key thing is it gives us a chance to reflect on the connections and what's really important, so that we really can have that explicitly in mind when we help teach our students, so that we know what are the connections we want to build on, what are the key ideas, and how are they related. Now, from the two examples we heard, I think there might be different answers to this question. Let's say you had drawn a big picture for your course. How might you use it in your teaching? So, would you bring it up at the beginning of the semester? How would you get students to work with it or use it? So I'm wondering if other folks have an idea on if you have one of these concept map type big pictures, when are you going to introduce it? How are you going to have students interact with it? Anyone have thoughts on that? Yes.
So we actually do this. Whoa. Sorry about that. We actually do this in the foundation department at Iowa School of Art because we teach a class, which helps them select from an enormous array of options what we're going to do next year. Essentially, we begin every class with a bubble chart of the school, and we say, this is the big picture, this is the tree we're going to concentrate on today. And so that helps them kind of tie it together. Also helps them figure out, oh, well, you know, if I'm not especially interested in this, something is coming up next week.
That's terrific. So you use it on a regular basis? That's right. Perfect. Has anyone ever asked students to draw a concept map? Do you want to share anything about how that works or how it plays into your system?
So I teach thermal fluid sciences. So it involves thermodynamics, heat transfer, and fluid dynamics. So what we're looking for is for them to make the connections between all three subjects. So it's tough. The book is a composite of about those three subjects, plus it's about 1,300 pages long. So what we try to do is on maybe a quarterly basis or a half semester basis, ask them to take the original mind map and build on it. So I was just thinking that what I'll probably do to kick off this semester is to probably say, here's what I think my map is, but I've left out some things to be filled.
Great. It sounds like in this domain, it's a very complex, and there's a lot of potential with 1,300 pages for a lot of fragmented knowledge. And that's just not going to be productive, because if you have all those fragmented bits of knowledge, you can't bring them to bear when you need it. So it's critical for students to see the connections here. I think that's really great. It's also really nice to have students do this, and you can either have your own in the background, or like I said, share a partially done one, or maybe, you know, use them in different combinations. But the beauty of having students build their own is it gives you a window onto what they see as central. So sometimes when I have students draw a concept map, I'll tell them how to do it. That's something to keep in mind. You can't just say, okay, everybody draw a concept map. They might not ever have heard of the term, so you kind of step by step walk them through it. Maybe you show them an example from something else as a model. And then what I say is, okay, now everybody look and see what node on your concept map has the most connection. Kind of an interesting question. And then they share that, and it's not always the same, but maybe there's something that comes up a lot. It also can help me see what their starting point is. So I like in Tom's case that maybe it happens more than once through the semester, and they have ownership. They build on their own. I like that feature as well. So these are all some interesting things you can do with concept maps. And I think that really there are a lot of ways to help use them to support students' effective organization of knowledge. Okay, so we're doing great. We're on the home stretch. The third principle that I wanted to talk with you all about is, if I had to pick, I can't pick, this is my favorite, I have to be honest. It's one of my top favorites, okay? It's the development of mastery. And I think it's something that we all face in teaching our students and helping support their learning, because we're all trying to help set the students on a trajectory. And maybe we see them early on in our program of study, maybe later, maybe middle, maybe a couple times. But thinking about students developing mastery is really important, and it tends to be hard because it's been a while since you all were in their shoes, right? So that's what makes it pretty tricky. And this principle really highlights that to get to mastery, there are a lot of things that need to come into place. Students need to acquire component skills. They need to practice integrating those skills. So, for example, just because students can do X in an isolated situation and Y, we can't assume that they can solve a task or, address a problem that requires X and Y together. It bumps up the degree of difficulty quite a lot. Also, another challenge that students often face is knowing when to apply what they've learned. Transfer is just really difficult. And so recognizing that just when students have learned to do something in one context, it's not a foregone conclusion that they'll be able to apply that in another context. When all that comes together, that's when you have mastery. And to bring that to what we can do as teachers to support students' learning and development of mastery is really, it starts with, I'll just look at the top, identifying the component skills. So if we're going to build students' mastery along this sort of path, first of all, we need to think about what are those components, okay? And this is where it's really tricky when you're an expert. So just to take a daily life example, I actually have a 14-year-old now, so this is becoming more real scenario for me. Oh, it's scary. That's my husband, I think, will be. So the expert says, okay, so what do we need to do? We need to back out of the space and exit the parking lot, whatever. Whoa, if you're a novice driver, I think maybe you can even remember. I can kind of remember. Would you even know what to do? What are all the steps? And when I ask people to think about this, okay, maybe you guys can generate it too. Someone always surprised, what's something that an expert might forget that a novice has to know to do this? Turn on the car, put it in reverse, gas and brake, where to look in the mirrors. The mirrors are excellent hard. Think about it. You automatically know which mirrors to use. And then steering when you're going backwards, we didn't even think about it, right? This is what's so amazing about mastery is that when you do something so much, it becomes automatized, great for performance in your disciplines. You do things so well without effort, right? Seemingly effortlessly. But then the problem is it's hard for you to recognize what it's like to be in the learner too. And it's even hard for you to identify what it is that you're doing. Because you're doing it so naturally. So what I think is one of the most important aspects for supporting students' development of mastery, particularly if you're in more of the acquiring and integration phases, is taking some time to think about what are the component skills that students need to learn. Really reflect on that so that you can build in the practice and the feedback and all the other things that are good for learning. So there's actually research on this difficulty, and I love the name that the researchers coined. It's called the expert blind spot. And when I was talking to the guy who coined that term, he actually said, I really love that term you came up with. He said, Marsha, I don't. Because blind spot makes it seem like it's small, but it's really big. So anyway, but expert, I think you get the point anyway. I still think it's good. Expert blind spot is when an expert in the field, in a teaching role, is somehow blinded by their expertise to the learning needs of novices, of their students. And this comes out in a bunch of different ways. So first of all, it's easy for us to overestimate what novices know and what they can do with what they know, and underestimate how long it's going to take them, right? To me, that comes in, when you have to make a test for a class period. That's one of the hardest things. It's hard enough to make a test, right? But figuring out how long it is really hard. Not seeing the steps novices must learn is the key that we're talking about for development of mastery. But also, experts can mispredict where novices will have difficulty and just presume that novices will do the things the way we do it. It's just all kinds of ways this comes out. focusing on this issue of what are the component skills, though, it's possible to overcome our expert blind spot. And there are a few strategies for doing it. Probably one of the most potent is to perform the task yourself, kind of in observing yourself mode. If you can't actually do it, simulate, think it through, and actually reflect on what do you do, what's the very first thing you do. Don't just start to reflect on what's the very first thing you do, and even what do you consider and possibly reject and why. If it's a problem, what do you pay attention to? What do you ignore? Doing that and really stepping through can help. One of the folks at Carnegie Mellon who runs our writing program and works with a lot of students in the introductory writing courses, she actually, when she makes a new writing assignment, she writes an essay herself. And she, then she can say, how long did it take me? Well, you have to multiply that by a factor. Probably 4, it depends on the situation. But then she can see, this is actually a little tricky. I did something kind of clever here. The students might not know that that's something we're going to need to think about. So I think it's really a helpful strategy. Another thing I was thinking of this morning that I thought I should mention is when students come to office hours, it's another really good way to get a window onto their thinking. To ask them to step you through how are they doing it, and maybe what problems they're having are representative of the class, and it may kind of spur in your mind, I would never have thought of doing it that way, or representing the problem that way, or I didn't know that that's where the gap in their knowledge was. But if you don't have students come into your office hours with those great examples of difficulty, this is a pretty good way to do it. So I thought in terms of an exercise for us to do and to really show how you can break it down, any task into pieces, and really, then it's kind of like the closet when you're unpacking. There are all these pieces that really students need to know if you really break it down. I thought we'd try it. And I tried to pick a task that would be kind of all-encompassing. Maybe it's not great, but rather than have a choice. So think about writing a research paper. Written communication is a pretty important domain general skill. If you just tell students, okay, go write a research paper in your discipline, or write a paper, final paper, in your discipline, what are all the skills and steps they're going to need to do? So talk with a partner and see how many you can come up with. And then we'll come back and compare notes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I just asked if they wanted to share any ideas.
How many?
Okay. Okay, sure.
Do it, even though it's hard to go back and forth, because I think it's important. So how many did you get? Did you break it down? Yeah, so someone said could get up to millions, but it depends on the type of which we're taking, the level. Right? So that's an interesting point. You know, how far do we break it down? Yeah, there's a good one. What is a research paper is maybe the first step. And this is what I love about the second. You have to, like, blast your assumptions out the door. Yeah. Are there other ones that you think of, other comments on this? Yeah. Oh, and maybe we can bring the mic around. Don't forget. Then we can all hear you.
So I actually teach an undergraduate level statistics class that's taken by freshmen. So the concept map you had up there, that's my concept. I mean, that was beautiful.
I talk about it, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. That is great. So my students don't try to research paper based on problem solving and very open-ended problems. And what I realized is that there are a lot of tools and methods that we teach in this class. There's the t-test for one mean, the t-test for two means, the t-test for one proportion. And students may master each tool separately. But if you just give them 10 problems together, the key challenge for them is identifying the problem. And just identifying what is the parameter of interest. Do I have one sample or am I comparing two samples? Which is the appropriate test? So what I started doing is just giving them many practice opportunities where you give them a bunch of open-ended problems and say, I don't want you to solve this problem. I just want you to identify the problem. Let's just go through it and tell me, what is the parameter of interest? Are you comparing one to one? Are you comparing two multiple groups? Which test will you use? And I think that's when they start really developing the mastery on the bigger picture.
Yeah. Thank you. I really like that example because sometimes it really is those preliminary steps that we just automatically, this is what's interesting about experts too. When an expert sees a problem, you see it differently from a student. So giving them practice, identifying, looking for what they need to find in the problem can be really valuable. What I super love about that is that you don't have them solve it. Right? Because students want to get the answer and put it in the box. And if you let them solve it, they'll focus on that and they'll think that's the point. But you're really highlighting to them this skill, this early on skill, it's really important. I want you to stop there. I love that. I wish I could get more of my colleagues to do that. I think it's great. Is there another comment or idea that came out of this that folks want to share?
I am hoping that there are somewhere colleagues in this room who have spoken with many of us who are in the audience, but mostly right here in the first row, is consider speaking to the librarian and bring them into together to help with this entire concept.
Well, and I think, same as it, I think a lot of universities, librarians think about this, and whereas, in each of our fields we just do it, they think about it and analyze it. So maybe they have less of an expert blind spot because they're explicitly thinking about the steps. Did you have another comment? Yes.
I can tell you I teach two research-based classes, and one is at the freshman sophomore level and one is at the senior level. And students don't understand the research process and how to learn research. And we do take it for granted that they might have learned this grammar school, high school, and what I'm learning more and more is that they're not getting how to do a research paper whatsoever. So I do have to break it down. And I'll have these students here who don't know that the library website even has a place where they can automatically get a citation for an article. And I go through that with them, but I have to kind of think, we have to kind of consider the fact that, unfortunately, a lot of them aren't coming in as a blank slate. They don't get the same type of education that maybe we have gotten in terms of this process. So I start from the beginning. In every class, no matter what level.
Yeah, no matter what level. Interesting. I think there's a follow-up over here. Yes.
Another librarian here. I have students come to my office frequently by appointment if possible, but often not, to work on a term paper in terms of doing the library research for it. And before we touch a computer, we sit down and we have paper in front of me. We write down the title of their paper. I make them think through what this title is in the town book. Then we look at each aspect of that and come up with a terminology that fits that, the synonyms that they need. I also find that they have never experienced the concept of Boolean algebra, and one of the ways that I keep this going back to our analogies is we talk about the calculator with parentheses and how the parentheses are used to segregate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And all this is done in the process of helping one student in my office each time it occurs, unless they're a veteran, with the concepts because they've seen before. But we go through all of these different steps, and then we run the search, and then we look and see what's wrong with the results and how we need to improve it. So there's a lot goes on in this process just to get your information before you even think about writing. And I have Russell Combo guides that have writing skills, reading skills, and those kinds of links to sources on the web to do this, so I have that covered as well.
That's amazing. Now, what I'm going to point out is I think that story is exactly analogous to our statistics inspectors, right? There's so much important stuff going on in sort of understanding the problem and planning. But what do students want to do? And they want to get something done. They want to have something written, or they want to go to the computer and get that list of reference, get the search results. But there's actually a lot of research on expert-novice differences in solving problems, and it's relevant here. You guys are emphasizing the planning, right? So obviously experts are faster overall than novices. But if you look at the proportion of time experts spend on planning, it's huge. What do students do? They dive in, right? And so this is where we can really begin to recognize that's a major difference between experts and novices, between you and your students, and really try to help them by exposing some of those planning steps. Oh, another comment there and there. And then
I just thought of one thing as we were talking, sort of to integrate the other concepts you were talking about. I teach anatomy and physiology. Sometimes it's hard to get students to, to integrate things, but I was thinking a good idea would be to give them an assignment and then ask them, well, what do you think you need to know in order to solve this problem? Here's the problem, and what information, or what don't you know, or what do you know in order, to solve whatever problem it is, discuss whatever disease we're talking about. So sort of integrating that prior knowledge stuff and then getting them as a group to identify what they do and don't know.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. And there was one other comment. Yes.
I just wanted to say, when I think about a research paper, I think one of the biggest expert blind spots is that we as scholars often take for granted that experts disagree about things and then you explore a question. And I remember when I was in elementary school, a project I was given, everyone was assigned a state. I was assigned Oklahoma. And I had to do a project on Oklahoma, which there was no disagreement or controversy about it. I was supposed to find out how many people lived there and what the main industries were, and I reported back the facts, and I got an A. It was very good. I think I plagiarized too, but but that's what I did. I reported back. So I went into college thinking that's what you do for a research paper. And I remember the first time, this is where this inaccurate prior knowledge comes in. The first time the professor said I discovered a literature review. Well, I didn't know what literature was. I had no idea what she was talking about. And it took me a long time as both a student and then even again as a teacher to realize that when we say research, we're generally talking about exploring a question, and usually a question about which experts disagree. So the idea that historians disagree about the past is something that most even very educated people don't realize. They think history is, this happened then and then this happened and then this happened. And I've talked to my history colleagues, and they say, no, history is about making an argument about the past and supporting it with evidence. Historians disagree about what caused a particular war or, what happened. That's history. It's not just saying, and I think that idea that they're not reporting facts, but they're actually exploring the question is maybe one of the toughest tasks in writing a research paper and one of the big, blind spots for us as scholars.
Thank you so much. I really think that's a good set of points. Really unpacking those assumptions and different understanding. Okay, so we've done this. Oh, we even tackled how could you get students to practice some of the components with having them just set up the problem, having them just take the computer aside and go on paper and practice even the Boolean logic for generating a search term. So let's say you've identified the component skills. Another thing that you can do in between or around all this and the practice of those component skills is you can model your expert practice to students. It's another way to help students get a window onto what it is you're doing. And here's some examples of that. Just if you just do something, performing is not enough. It's like if I watch a dancer perform, I'm not getting a window into the details. But if someone does do what the instructor say, do a task, and you sort of think aloud as you do it. Maybe you out loud you say the questions that you're asking yourself. You note what you're paying attention to. The first thing you notice, what patterns you're seeing, how you're deciding, and kind of the whys behind it. That can be really helpful to students. And this is even where a couple times in my work with colleagues one-on-one, it's come up that, Marsha, I was, doing this modeling or, solving a problem on the board, TAs, who may do this in recitation as well, and I made a mistake. It was so embarrassing, so awful. But no. Actually, I'm sure it's rare, but it's good because it's much more common for students. And how you get out of one of those dead ends is a really valuable lesson for students because what do they see? They see the pretty, smooth, efficient solution path, which may not represent their experience. So, if that ever happens to you, I'm sure it's happened to me many times, it's kind of, this is, and I said, you can sell it. I think I just went down a dead end here. This is a really good way for me to show you how you get out of a dead end and make it really a learning moment. So I think that's another nice add-on to that. In terms of practice and feedback, we've talked about it a little bit. I'd like to go to my music and sports or performing arts and sports examples, because this is probably the place where in coaching and training we do the best practice and feedback. We really get students to do the task, but not just in isolation, but also putting it together. So I'll probably say this wrong because I'm not a sports enthusiast, but in soccer matches, if you're coaching the kids on the such and such team, yeah, they do drills, but they don't stop there at drills, right? You have scrimmages, and then they're prepared for the game. It's builds, and you have them put the skills together when you can give them feedback, but they also need to have built those skills up so they can put them together in the first place. Our drama colleagues at CMU would have a course in voice and movement and other things, articulation, things like that. And the students would be doing great in those individual areas of study, and then they'd get on the stage and they'd be falling off the stage, literally in one case, because when you have those skills in their memory fresh, it takes a lot of your attention just to carry out the individual skill. So you don't have a lot of attention to spread it over three things at once. It's only when you have gotten enough practice and fluency in those individual skills that you can begin to put them together. And so how do you give students that practice that's going to really promote them to develop that fluency? Having it be repeated, aligned with the goal that you want them to achieve, and then in terms of feedback, that it's timely and targeted. And so the idea here is really thinking about the goal that you want students to achieve can help you in identifying good practice opportunities and in finding efficient ways to give feedback. There are just so many examples of this where you may be tempted to give practice on the whole task, but maybe there's a component that can make it more efficient for you and students. You may also be tempted to give feedback on a paper assignment, on the grammar, the coherence, the argument structure, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're focusing on a particular skill that students need assistance with, or they're really struggling with, or you really want to push, then give them feedback on that. And say the point of this assignment, or make it not a full long research paper, make it a little one-pager. I use one pager for everything. Make it brief, make it concise, make it short. And then students can see it as a lower stakes practice opportunity, but you have more chances to give them that targeted feedback. And I'm sure those are things you're doing already. Some of the strategies here in terms of helping students develop mastery really lead to basically finding what students need to learn to achieve the goals you have for them and giving them practice on it. You can do this in class. So there are all kinds of things you can do. You can have students think about a problem, pair up to talk about it, and then share in the group. We've done some of that. Brainstorming, concept mapping, case studies where in class students do small group discussion. Some of the real advantage of using these strategies in class is that, number one, you're seeing the students actually tackling the problems, and you can see where they trip up, rather than them doing it on the homework alone and not seeing it. Also, when you see it, you can actually address it, maybe just in time. It's a little just-in-time teaching in there. And it's really, we have seen a lot of studies about how the sort of straight-up lecturing at students is not conducive to learning. So, but maybe you have a very large class. How do you make it an active learning class? One of the studies that I think is really nice that address the question of what's the value of this kind of think, pair, share kind of approach was done in a physics class, where they used those clickers, personal response systems. And what they did is they had seen that when you give students the clickers and have them try to solve it and then vote, and then talk to a partner and then vote again, that this tended to be better than when students were in the same classes but were receiving a lecture for that time period, rather than having mini lectures and these concept questions, mini lecture concept questions. And in this study, they found that when students did this thinking about it, talking, and then thinking again and voting on a different question, they found that there was learning benefit from both aspects of that. When students worked on it on their own, that helped them do better on the second one, but the advantage was even greater when they paired up and talked to a peer. Really talking through the concepts and so forth, even when no one in the group had the right answer in the first place, they were still more likely at the repeat to get it correct, and more likely on an analogous problem to get it correct. So that idea of actually learning by solving problems, learning by doing, is really important. And the big effect here is that, that practice and feedback, although the difficult questions had lower accuracy rates, the benefit of this practice in the classroom with the peer-to-peer learning was the most striking. So I think that's a really nice example of even active learning you can do in a large lecture-size class. Another strategy, just to get to a feedback strategy before we wrap up, I happen to be a fan of rubrics. They are an investment, though. I always say to folks, you think about the value of rubrics is it makes you think about what you value, and it helps you communicate what you value to students. I suggest giving rubrics to students with the assignment so they know what you're expecting and they know how to focus their effort. A lot of times students' practice is not as efficient because they don't know kind of what we're looking for and they're focused on this when we really want them to do that. So rubrics are a strategy. It's also, once you put in the investment, it's very much more efficient because you have this table of the things you value in the rows, the levels of performance across the columns, and then you can sort of look at the assignment and just kind of highlight this is where you are and make a comment, and it tends to be something that gets really efficient for your practice. And I think it gives some really valuable feedback too. And finally, I think this idea of scaffolding, we haven't talked about it explicitly, but where you start off with a lot of structure and support, and you gradually remove that. So a building scaffolding is what's put up when the building is being erected, and then it's taken away. Instructionally, you can do the same thing by having more support and more structure early on, but then you can't stop there because then students will only be able to work with that structure. Then you gradually can scale it away and ask them to work on more complex problems with less support, whatever. And I think I have some examples of that. So you can, like we said, break the papers into assignments, use prompts to guide students through difficult steps, or this partial answer idea that came up in a couple of the comments. So I think we're running out of time. I just wanted to summarize that for the three principles we talked about, the first one was prior knowledge, and I think we really highlighted the value of activating students' prior knowledge. And when you think they may have some inaccurate or insufficiencies, assessing it is the first step to knowing how to adjust. And we talked about some good ways to doing that. In terms of the organization of knowledge, just I think recognizing that the connections are as important as the pieces of knowledge, thinking about what knowledge networks we have in mind for our students, and promoting them, helping students see those connections is important. And finally, in terms of helping students learn in a way that they develop mastery, identifying the component skills of the key piece, and then also thinking about the practice and feedback for integration, as well as the component skills and for transfer and application. So I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my early mentors, Herb Simon, who was a Carnegie Mellon University professor, that really gives us a learner-centered approach. He said, learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. The teacher can advance learning by influencing what the student does learn. And that's really our focus on learning here today. Thank you so much. I had a great time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
So thank you to Marsha Lovett. You now know 3 of the 7 research-based principles for smart teaching. If you want to know all 7, come back for the other 4 this afternoon. We'll be in the same place for Dr. Michele Di Pietro's talk. You have 5 great breakout sessions to choose from now, so make it a great day.